The hands and the arms tell us a lot about what a poker player is thinking or feeling. When they're strong, when they're confident, they take up more territory. So you'll see the elbows are further out. All of a sudden they realize, oh, I went from a great hand to a rag hand, and the shoulders are tucked in. The hands do the same thing. When we're confident, we tend to hold our hands out very strongly and so forth. When we lack confidence, they tend to be more meek. When we're struggling with things and we pacify, we use our hands. We rub them against each other. Sometimes we wring our hands and so forth. This is indicative of some small amount of stress. But when things really bother us, when things are really troubling, we save this behavior in particular. We intertwine our fingers and we rub them this way. So a player all of a sudden goes from looking at his whole cards to looking at the community cards, and you see him doing this. Marginal or weak, most likely weak. Now that's their perception. They're struggling with something, and we know it because they're interlacing their fingertips. When we feel confident, we'll interlace our fingers and put them behind our back, or in the back of the head, and so the elbows are out. And this looks like the hooding effect. When you see, for instance, a cobra hoods, it claims a lot of territory. When we're strong, we'll interlace those fingers, put them behind our head, and hold those elbows out. And we can do that for a very long time. But when we lack confidence, we can't do it at all. And when we try it, we fail. So look for this behavior, because a lot of times you'll see a player who all of a sudden feels very strong, and you see the elbows are out, interlaced fingers behind the head, very strong, very confident. Now I talked about rubbing the hands to indicate that we are lacking confidence or we're under stress. But we also have behaviors of the hand that indicate confidence, and steepling is one of them. Steepling, like a church steeple, is the most powerful behavior we have. And you often see public speakers steepling as they're talking. This is a great sign that they feel very confident. So a player looks at his cards, all of a sudden steeples, maybe recovers from it. Good sign, powerful sign that they're very confident about what they're seeing. Conversely, when they go from steepling and all of a sudden now they're wringing their hands, then they're not as confident. Something has changed on the board, and it's reflected in the hands. The other thing that we can look for the hands for is any kind of pacifiers. When people are struggling with something, they're dealing with something, they're stressed, you'll see them pulling on their fingers, you'll see them playing with their rings, you'll see them massaging their hands, all to deal with the stress of the moment. Look for the arms and the hands to come together when the person feels weak, and watch them to expand and become more territorial when the person feels comfortable and confident and strong. Associated with facial tells and mouth tells and so forth is also the chin. We don't really pay attention to our chin, and yet we know that when we're confident, when we feel powerful, when we feel strong, when we feel comfortable, our chin, we tend to stick out. When we lack confidence, when we feel weak, when we feel less strong, we tend to tuck the chin in. And then when we feel really threatened, when we feel like things are really bad, when we're struggling, we tend to tuck it in really, really tight. And you'll see this with poker players. Well, they'll actually start out with their chin high, and as things develop, all of a sudden you see them with their chin tucked all the way in. A very good indicator to tell us that something's bothering this individual or that they're worried about something, and rarely does anyone really know where their chin is at any one time. So pay attention to the chin. It's a wonderful tell. Also associated with the chin are the muscles of the face. Now we have very big muscles along this side, along the side of the face. These have to do with chewing. When we're under stress, these become very tight. And the area here becomes very muscular. Sometimes it twitches. Sometimes the muscles become so tight that the person's jaw actually locks. And you see that anger coming through. Now obviously in poker you're not going to see a lot of that. But what you will see is the tension in the facial muscles. Anytime we see facial muscles that are tense, this is a pretty good indicator that something's bothering this individual. Most likely they're weak, or they're marginal, or they're being forced to do something they really don't want to do. And so that tension is reflective of the fact that they're most likely weak to marginal and that they have a high degree of discomfort. Now the eyes tell us a lot of information about what the brain is processing, how it's assessing the world around us. And some of the information I'm about to share with you is very little known outside of scientific research. For instance, when we like something, our pupils dilate. If we see something pretty, our pupils naturally dilate to absorb more light and to sort of take it more in. But when we don't like something, our pupils constrict. They even constrict when we see someone we don't like, or we see a picture of something we don't like. The pupils constrict. There's an evolutionary reason for this, and that has to do with survival, that when we see something that could hurt us, by constricting the pupils, we have more perfect vision. All photographers know this with aperture settings and so forth. And the same thing happens in poker. You could look at your hole cards and you may see something there that you don't like, and so your pupils may suddenly tighten up. But even beyond that, our eyes do all sorts of things to demonstrate or communicate how we feel about something. And you definitely see this when you greet somebody and you say hi. And the next time you meet somebody else, you go, hi, and you see the arching of the eyes. Well, the opening of the eyebrows, or the arching of the eyes is sort of flashbulb eyes. This widening of these orbits is indicative of something very positive. And this often gets poker players in trouble because they look at their hole cards and they realize they have a monster hand, and all of a sudden you see them arch their eyebrows. And this gives away that they're very strong. Even though they're wearing sunglasses, it can still be seen. The other thing that we can see from the eyes often is squinting. When we don't like something, we tend to squint. If you remember the old Clint Eastwood westerns, when he was ready to shoot somebody, he always sort of squinted, and everybody seemed to squint. And we do this naturally. And in fact, this little area right below the eyes, the minute we sense something we don't like, it begins to vibrate or to encroach on the eye itself, so that there's a very minuscule sort of blocking of the eyes, of diminishing the size of the eye. And this, of course, is to protect us. The other thing that we do with the eyes, you'll often see it with people when they interact. Someone will say, hey, can you help me move this weekend? And they cover their eyes as they're processing the information. Now, they may help out, but this blocking behavior, this movement of the hands to the eyes, is really saying, ooh, you know what, I really didn't like hearing that question. Now, this is a very accurate tell. We know it's extremely accurate because we actually see it with children who have been born blind. When they hear things they don't like, they'll actually put their hand over their eyes, even though they can't see. So we know this is accurate. We know it's millions of years old. And we know that we can rely on this behavior. Another one you'll see with the eyes is the person will look down at his hole cards, and then it takes them a long time to open up the eyelids. Very accurate, very indicative that there's something negative there. Because when it's positive, we immediately want to see it and look at it and spend time on it. When we don't, it's reflective of that. The other behavior we'll see with the eyes is that they tend to flutter. The eyelids flutter when we struggle with things or we have difficulty. So a lot of times when we're frustrated with the board, we're frustrated with the cards that we've been given, or something's going on at the table, you'll see a fluttering of the eyelids. The other thing we know about the eyes is that when we're very comfortable, our eye blink rate goes down. But when there's stress, the eye blink rate goes up. Now the average is somewhere between 8 and 12 a minute, blinks per minute. But I've seen people whose eye blink rate will go up to 80, 90 times a minute when they're under extreme stress. So, does that mean they're bluffing? Does that mean they're lying? No. But you can know this: if you see a high blink rate, then we know that the person is under stress. Now, we've talked about confidence and lack of confidence and so forth. And so obviously when we're confident, we tend to have less eye activity. We tend to have a lower eye blink rate. We tend to see less eye blocking and so forth. So look for these behaviors. They're associated with the eyes to tell us how the person feels. When they're confident, they tend to be very open, very wide. When people lack confidence, when there's an issue or there's a problem, we tend to squint. And of course, one of the other things that we look for is, where is the person looking? If the person is looking at their chips right after the flop comes out, that's usually a pretty good clue that they're going to be doing something with the chips. And we shouldn't ignore tells of this sort. So there's a lot of information there with the eyes, but we have to put it in context. We have to look at what's going on on the board. We have to look at what's their reaction to other people and say, what is it that caused this behavior? Did something happen on the board that the person immediately covered their eyes? And you usually see this, for instance, on the turn or the river. All of a sudden, somebody that was strong, they're covering their eyes. Now they sense they're weak. So take a look at the eyes, compare it against other parts of the body, and use that to form a more perfect picture of this individual's poker tells. By now you realize that the forehead also reveals a lot of information. And oftentimes you'll see a poker player who's struggling with a decision, or they look at their cards or their community cards and they sense that they're not in a great position, or maybe even that they're weak. And so you see the furrowing of the forehead, you see the knitting of the eyebrows and so forth. So we look to the forehead as a very good indicator of there's some issue, they're struggling with something. Now, oftentimes you'll see people, when they're concentrating, as they're doing some sort of math problem or something, that they do this also. So we equate any kind of anxiety or tension or even severe focus with these tells that we pick up from the forehead. We've also mentioned before about the rubbing of the temple, rubbing of the forehead, or maybe even the throbbing of the veins on the forehead. Again, all indicative of something negative, all indicative of some sort of internal struggle as the person is trying to figure out what to do, or maybe even realizing that there is some issue there. So when we look at the head, the first thing we look at is the top of the head and the side of the head. And there's oftentimes tells that are relevant to what's going on at the game, but the person doesn't realize it. So you may see somebody move their fingers through their hair as they're ventilating their head. This is a pacifier. This lets us know that they're struggling with something. They're having some sort of difficulty. This is a discomfort display. We usually only see it in those situations. Or you may see them actually massaging the temples of the forehead. Again, struggling with something, dealing with something that they perceive as an issue. Now, women do it slightly differently because women tend not to touch their face as much as men. So while men ventilate by running their fingers through their head, women will reach behind and ventilate the hair at the back of the head. In doing so, they're cooling themselves down. And usually this takes place when they're struggling with something. There's also tells of the legs. Now, tells of the legs are a little bit more difficult because a lot of times they're very difficult to see, and yet they're there. So what do we look for? Well, number one, look for people pacifying by rubbing their hands on their foreleg. That's a very good indicator that, again, they feel weak, they lack confidence, they're struggling with something. Look for people who are constantly moving their legs together, opening them up, closing them, opening them, closing, and so forth. This is like the person who is strumming their fingers on the table. It's saying, hey, let's move things along. Most likely, they're marginal to strong. They want to be involved, and so this is why we're seeing this behavior. The other thing we can look for the tells, for the legs, is tells that indicate high confidence. So we'll see the person all of a sudden shift way forward. And usually if you're able to look at them, if you're sitting next to them, you'll notice that their feet and the legs change positions so that they're actually in the starter's position. So you have one leg, one foot behind the other. The person is leaning forward. Very good indicator that they're strong. But what about when they're weak? What about when they lack confidence? What about when they feel that they need to guard against something? Usually what we'll see is the person will go from having very flat feet to all of a sudden they wrap their ankles around the legs of the chair. Extremely, extremely accurate tell. It says, I'm very worried, I'm very concerned. The other tell that we look for is what we call happy feet. Now, some people will bounce their leg all the time, and that's fine. That's how they deal with just daily stress or dealing with the situation that they're in. But some people, you only see that when they're really happy. Literally, they get happy feet. And so it shows up immediately when they realize they have a monster hand. And so look for it. Look for it beside you. Look for it in their clothing, because most people, when they get happy feet, it shows up in their clothing. Their shirt will start to vibrate and so forth. Also look for people who sit with their legs spread apart, but all of a sudden just draw them close together. Again, this is part of that freeze response. And what it's saying is, I don't feel confident. I feel like something's at issue here. I feel like something's wrong. And so they bring their legs together, and they might even bring their arms together. So these are the tells of the legs. And when it comes to the legs and the feet, you also want to look for people who cross their feet, cross their legs, and then they manage to interlock their ankles around their feet. This is also indicative of a person who's self-restraining and is struggling with something. So I want to talk about the mouth, because there's a lot of tells that are related to the mouth. One of the things that we often see when people are under stress is, for instance, there'll be moisture just above the lips. This is a very accurate indicator that they're struggling with something. We see it with people bluffing. They'll go all in, and all of a sudden we'll see a little bead of sweat. This is usually associated with something negative. But there's many things that are associated with the mouth. For instance, when we're confident, when we're strong, when we feel very comfortable, the lips are full. Blood rushes in there. The lips are warm. They're very plastic, very rubbery. You can feel it. You can sense it. But we don't really look at our lips. We don't watch our lips, so we don't really know what they look like. But we know this. When we struggle with something, when we find ourselves in a difficult situation, or we find ourselves under stress, our lips tend to get smaller. And not just that, we tend to compress them. So you go to the airport and you see canceled flights, and you'll see people doing this. All right, putting pressure on their lips, compressing the lips. It does two things. It helps to relieve stress, and at the same time it communicates, boy, this is really bothering me. And you'll see this with poker players. They'll look at their cards, they'll look at the community cards, there'll be some issue there, they feel themselves weak, and you see the lips disappear, or you'll see the tension in the muscles around the mouth, compressing the lips and so forth. Extremely accurate tell. So when we're confident, we have nice, full, healthy lips. In fact, we tend to separate our lips, let in more air and so forth. When something is negative, we tend to keep our mouth closer together. We tend to compress the lips. And in fact, when things are really bad, we not only compress our lips and our lips sort of disappear, but the corners of our mouth actually come down so that it looks like an upside down U. Very difficult to do unless you really feel very negative emotions. Now, when we're under a little bit of stress, we'll tend to lick our lips. So we'll touch our lips, lick our lips, and so forth. That's just to deal with a little bit of stress. But when there's high stress, then we do other things, including biting the lip. And you'll see people under a lot of stress doing that. I certainly see it at school on test day with students who aren't prepared. They do a lot of lip biting. And in poker, you'll see the same thing. You'll see somebody will raise, and somebody down the line will bite their lip. Very subtle, but very accurate. They didn't like that. They're troubled by it. And this is a very accurate indicator. So any touching of the mouth, licking of the lips, and so forth, disappearing of the lips, indicate that there are issues, that there are problems, lack of confidence. Fullness of the lips, relaxed muscles around the mouth indicate that we're confident and that we have comfort. So we also look at the nose to unveil information. Most people don't realize that their noses also give off tells. One of the ones that we often miss is when the wings of the nose begin to dilate or throb. This usually takes place when the person is going to do something physical. And in poker, usually I've seen this when they're getting ready to go in. They've got a monster hand, they've seen people commit to the pot, and they're just waiting for their turn to go in. So look for that, because we know that when the wings of the nose begin to dilate, something powerful, something physical is about to take place. The other one you may not have noticed, but almost every mother has seen this, is when we crinkle our noses. And it looks like this. Now, for some people it's very short, it might be slight, and for others it's quite lengthy and quite pronounced. They'll go, right? So you usually hear that when somebody offers you something and you go, I don't think so. That nose crinkle is one of those behaviors that is very authentic. We see it with babies. When they're offered food and they don't like it, they'll crinkle their noses. But I've also seen it in the courtroom where a juror hears something that's being said and they don't like it, and they'll crinkle their nose. So in poker, we look for this tell, this very powerful and accurate tell, to tell us that someone doesn't like something. You usually see it when they first look at their hole cards and they'll crinkle their nose. That's a very accurate tell that tells us, they don't like their hand. Now, we may see it once, we may see it twice, we may see it every time the community cards are unveiled. But we look for that behavior because we'll see it over and over again. And when we see it, we know that the person doesn't like what they have or they don't like their situation. The shoulders also reveal a lot of information, especially about how a person feels. Confident people tend to have shoulders that are very squared, they're down, they're very broad, and so forth. When we begin to lack confidence, we begin to notice that one or the other shoulder begins to elevate. Here's how it plays out in everyday life. You ask somebody, hey, is that project going to be done by the end of the week? And they go, yeah, I think so. The fact that that shoulder, one shoulder, rose towards the ear suggests that, no, there's a lot of doubt there. There's a lot of hesitation. There's lack of confidence. So what I tell people is, anytime you see the shoulders near the ears, the person lacks confidence. And of course, the extreme of that is when you ask somebody a question and they go, I don't know. That's very accurate. They don't know. It's very accurate. But when you only see one shoulder, it's even more accurate because the person's trying to mask the insecurities that they feel. And so you'll see them looking at their whole cards, and after they look at their whole cards, that shoulder will rise. You see? And it's very indicative that they lack confidence in their own hand, in their own situation. So look for the shoulders to tell us a little bit about what the person is feeling or experiencing, and you'll find that it's very accurate. The other thing you'll see with shoulders sometimes when a person is very, very insecure in their situation or they lack confidence is they'll sit on their hands and they'll force both shoulders up. When you see this, chances are the person's very weak, very insecure, and their shoulders are transmitting this information to you. The hands say a lot, but more specifically, the thumbs say a lot. And just like steepling is a powerful display of comfort and confidence, thumb displays are also a high indicator of confidence. You'll often see players, they'll look at their cards and then they'll put their hands interlaced in front of their cards. When they feel strong, their thumbs come out. And then as things change, as the community cards show that maybe they're not as strong as they think they are, you'll see the thumbs disappear. So look for thumb displays, up, down, so forth, to indicate how the person really feels about their situation. And always remember that in poker, we're not really looking at reality. What we're looking at is perceptions of reality. If you perceive yourself as weak, your thumbs are going to go down. If you perceive yourself as strong, your thumbs are going to pop up. Not only do we have mouth behaviors, but we also have tongue behaviors. And as I said, a lot of times when we lick our lips, we're indicating that we're under some sort of stress. But there's other things that we do with the tongue. For instance, some poker players will actually rub the inside of their cheek with their tongue and so forth. Very good, very accurate indicator that they're struggling with something. We all remember Michael Jordan. As he was going up for layups, he'd stick his tongue out and sort of lay it to the side and so forth. A lot of people find comfort in that, sticking their tongue out and so forth. But there's one behavior with the tongue that you should also note, and it's called a tongue jut. And it looks like this. It's very quick. The tongue juts out between the teeth but doesn't touch the lips. So it looks like this. It's called a tongue jut, and it says, I'm getting away with something, or you didn't catch me, or I just did something and I feel very, very confident. So associate that behavior with confidence, associate it with someone getting away with something. It's a very accurate tell. And lastly, with the tongue, look for people who move their tongue around a lot, or who masticate, chew. And so you'll see them doing this. This is a pacifier. And the more they do it, the greater your reliance that they're weak or marginal and that they're usually struggling with something. Look to the torso to tell you about what a person is feeling or thinking. In dating situations, you'll often see the person will turn their ventral side, their belly side, towards the person they like. Well, guess what? We see the same thing in poker. When they like their cards, they'll face their cards. When they don't, they'll actually turn away from their cards. We'll lean towards the things we like and away from the things that we don't. And most poker players don't realize that their torso is leaning ever closer towards the cards when they feel strong and confident about their hand. The other thing you'll see with the torso is sometimes you'll see torso shielding, where the person will cross their arms. They're sort of blocking. Now, some people like to sit that way because it's comfortable. But if the flop comes out and all of a sudden you see the person quickly covers their belly area, there's some issue there because we saw a stimulus, the flop, and then the reaction to it. The other thing you'll see with the torso is that when we feel confident, we tend to sit higher. When we lack confidence, we sort of let go. You'll see it with someone walks in through the door and you give them some bad news like, hey, you know, you got a flat tire. Oh, same thing happens in poker. When we feel confident, when we feel strong, when we're happy, we sit differently. We sit higher. And when we lack confidence and so forth, we tend to get smaller. The other thing you should look for with the torso is ventilating. Just as neck ventilating is a reflection of stress, some players will ventilate their shirt, or if they're wearing a hoodie or something, they'll ventilate their sweatshirt. It's indicative that they're stressed, or they're having difficulty, or that they lack confidence. So look for the torso. We lean in when we like things. We push away when we don't. Extremely accurate, and it's right there for everybody to see.